Hey there and welcome. Have you ever stopped to think about what's actually going on inside your head? Today, we are going on an absolutely incredible journey. We're going to answer a question that seems simple, but has a totally mind-bending answer. What happens in your brain between the moment you hear a word and the moment you speak it?
Yeah, this is the big question. How does a sound wave entering your ear transform into a sound wave leaving your mouth? I mean, it feels instant, right? Almost like magic. But the path it takes through our neural circuitry, well, that's one of the most fascinating stories in all of biology.
So, to really get this, we're not going to try to look at the whole brain at once. That would be overwhelming. Instead, we're going to do something much cooler. We're going to follow a single sensory signal, just a tiny pulse of energy, and track it as it makes its way through the entire system, from start to finish.
All right, so our journey begins right at the synapse. This is that microscopic little gap where one neuron passes a message to the next. You can kind of think of it like the brain's front door. Every single signal that comes in has to knock first to see if it's even allowed inside.
Now, here's the thing. Not every signal is welcome everywhere. Each connection point, each synapse, is like a uniquely shaped lock. It's just sitting there, waiting for a very specific key. That's our incoming energy pulse that has the exact right shape to fit.
So the brain's first job is basically a matching game. An energy pulse, our key, shows up at the synapse, our lock, and the brain instantly has to figure out, is this a perfect match for my existing wiring? The answer to that one simple question, well, that determines everything that happens next.
And this, my friends, is where it gets really, really interesting. Because what happens if the key doesn't fit the lock perfectly? You might think that's a failure, right? An error in the system. But no, it's actually the very foundation of how we learn and how we remember.
Okay, so there are two totally different outcomes here. On the left, you've got a perfect match. The key fits the lock, boom, the signal zips right through and triggers an action. You hear your name, you turn your head. Simple. But look at the right side. If there's a mismatch, something incredible happens. The connection experiences a kind of physical stress. The source calls it residual strain. And that strain, that is the very first step in building a memory.
So the huge insight here is that learning isn't just about successful connections firing off perfectly. It's the stress, the tension from the imperfect ones that physically rewires our brain and builds the foundation for new memories. It's such a beautiful, counterintuitive idea, isn't it?
So what do we call these little building blocks that are created by all this strain and adaptation? Well, according to the source material, they're called memory pixels.
And these aren't just some abstract idea. Memory pixels are actual neural networks, and each one has its own unique energy signature. A specific wavelength, a specific frequency, a specific amplitude. You can think of them as tiny, distinct notes in the grand symphony of your mind, just waiting to be played together to create complex thoughts.
Okay, so we've seen how a mismatch forges a memory. But what about that other path? What happens when the signal is a perfect match? Let's take a look at how the brain takes an internal thought, a whole group of those memory pixels all firing together, and turns it into a real-world action, like speaking.
The process is actually amazingly straightforward. First, a thought group, a collection of those memory pixels, lights up. Then, that group sends out a series of super precisely timed signals to our muscles. Those signals stimulate the specific muscles in our throat and mouth, and finally, a sound comes out. It's this perfect cascade from thought to action. But for any of this to work, for our speech to come out as clear words and not just a jumbled mess, two things are absolutely critical. The neurons have to fire in almost perfect synchronization, and they have to fire at just the right frequency or speed.
And here is where it all comes full circle. Back to that idea of strain. It turns out the amount of strain on a connection directly affects its firing speed. You can see it right here. The higher the strain load, the faster it fires. So that very same stress that helps build our memories also supercharges the system, controlling the speed and timing of our actions. So when you pull back and look at the whole picture, our brain isn't just a simple input-output machine. It's this beautiful, intricate dance between incoming energy, the productive stress of a mismatch, the creation of memory, and the perfectly synchronized firing that lets us speak and interact with the world.
And all of this leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to think about. If a memory is literally the physical echo of residual strain on our synapses, then what exactly is a dream? Could it be the brain's way of processing or maybe even easing that strain while we sleep? It's definitely something to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.